When we think of World War II, we often picture tanks grinding through mud or bombers streaking overhead. But beneath that chaos, ordinary men were quietly building something extraordinary. They weren't just fighting, they were surviving, often with nothing but shovels, timber, and their own ingenuity. The war forced soldiers, engineers, and civilians alike to become masters of fieldcraft, and nowhere did that show more than in the shelters they built. What's astonishing is that many of these World War II shelter hacks, crafted in desperation, still outperform some modern designs in insulation, stealth, and sheer practicality. These were shelters that didn't just keep men alive, they redefined what it meant to endure when everything else was falling apart. The dugout shelter remains the ultimate defense against nature and attack. The dugout was one of the simplest yet most effective World War II shelter designs ever created. Soldiers carved them straight into the earth, part trench, part underground cabin, and used the soil itself as armour. With a roof reinforced by logs, sod and sandbags, a well-built dugout could absorb artillery shock, regulate temperature, and hide its occupants from aerial surveillance. Some even had drainage channels to keep out rainwater and a small ventilation pipe to prevent suffocation. It wasn't glamorous, but it was genius. In survival terms, this principle still works better than most modern prefab bunkers. Earth provides thermal stability, cool in summer, warm in winter, and it's naturally soundproof. If someone today wanted to apply this, the steps are nearly the same. Start by digging into a hillside or flat terrain with a downward-sloping entrance to direct water away. Use logs, thick branches, or reclaimed boards to create a support roof, and cover it with packed soil mixed with clay for waterproofing. In effect, you've built a microclimate beneath the ground that needs no power, no insulation, and no expensive materials. Just the same timeless logic soldiers used to survive under shell fire. The log and soil bunker proves natural materials can outperform concrete. When steel and cement were too scarce to spare, World War II engineers turned to what they had: logs, clay, and raw earth. The log and soil bunker was a marvel of strength through simplicity. Layers of logs were stacked in alternating directions, with packed soil between them to absorb shock. Instead of resisting explosions like rigid walls, these bunkers flex slightly under pressure, distributing force instead of shattering. That design principle, flexibility under stress, is one modern builders still chase with reinforced materials. To recreate a structure like this today, you'd start with interlocking logs, notched at the ends for stability. Between each layer, you'd pack moist soil, mixed with just a small amount of gravel to prevent settling. The roof, well, that can be constructed with wider logs covered in a thick layer of dirt and vegetation for camouflage. This method, you see, creates an incredibly strong yet naturally insulated space. The science is pretty straightforward. Soil diffuses kinetic energy and wood absorbs vibration, making the combination far more durable than bare concrete when facing pressure or impact. Soldiers understood this intuitively, and honestly, their designs hold up 8 decades later. The sandbag fortification turned portability into protection. There's a reason you still see sandbags lining flood zones, military posts, and disaster areas today. They work. WWII soldiers could erect defensive shelters anywhere with little more than burlap, shovels, and manpower. But, the real innovation came in how they used them. Instead of stacking sandbags haphazardly, they built them in staggered brick-like patterns, tilting the walls slightly inward for stability. They layered tarps or canvas sheets between every few rows to create moisture barriers and, even a bit of soundproofing. Properly done, a sandbag wall could stop bullets, absorb shrapnel, and even resist collapsing after a blast. For anyone studying or practicing survival shelter design, the same rules apply. Fill each bag about 2/3 full so it molds easily to its neighbours and always stagger seams. The weight of the upper bags compresses those below, forming a nearly monolithic structure. Manuals even recommended dampening the sand slightly to make the walls denser and less prone to erosion. Today, this hack isn't just for combat zones, it's invaluable for flood defences, emergency barriers or field shelters where materials are limited. What worked for soldiers under fire still serves those facing nature's worst. The snow cave saved more men from freezing than any military blanket ever could. When fighting stretched into the brutal winters of Europe and Russia, soldiers had to adapt or die. In temperatures that turned rifles brittle and froze food solid, the snow cave became a lifesaver. It wasn't fancy, but it used one of nature's deadliest elements, snow, to create warmth. Soldiers would find a deep drift or compacted snowbank, carve out a hollow chamber, and shape a small entry tunnel lower than the main space. This allowed cold air to sink near the entrance, while warmer air stayed trapped inside. In extreme cold, the temperature in a snow cave could stay just below freezing, enough to keep a soldier alive overnight. Modern survivalists still use this method for Arctic training because it's one of the few natural shelters that truly works without fuel or tools. To replicate it, compact snow with your feet to create a firm layer, then carve slowly with a shovel or stick to avoid collapse. Smooth the inside walls to prevent dripping, and make a small vent hole in the ceiling for airflow. We soldiers didn't have advanced gear or thermal clothing. They had knowledge, and that made the difference. The camouflage trench turned invisibility into armour. By the mid-war years, air reconnaissance made traditional shelters deadly liabilities. The camouflage trench evolved as a countermeasure, using deception instead of durability. These trenches were dug low and narrow, often no wider than a man's shoulders, then covered with brush, sod and scrap materials that, perfectly matched the surrounding terrain. Some even used chicken wire to hold vegetation in place, allowing grass to grow naturally on top. To an enemy pilot, it looked like untouched ground, but underneath it was a fully functional defensive position. The principle behind this still applies in modern survivalism. The best shelter isn't always the strongest. It's the one that can't be seen. Whether you're concealing a camp in the wild or protecting equipment from theft, camouflage remains the first line of defense. The key is pattern disruption. Break up outlines with uneven materials, use colors that match your environment, and change textures. WWII soldiers didn't need advanced materials. They used mud, foliage, and shadows, nature's own disguise kit. Modern bunkers rely on concrete, steel, and sealed chambers, but when supply lines fail or power goes out, all that complexity becomes a liability. The shelters of WWII were the opposite: minimal, resourceful, and built entirely from what the earth provided. They didn't need air conditioning or reinforced panels. They relied on physics, craftsmanship, and, a deep respect for the environment. That's why many of these wartime designs continue to inspire off-grid builders, disaster planners, and military engineers today. These shelters remind us that survival is not about having the best materials. It's about using what's at hand intelligently. Whether you're a historian fascinated by wartime ingenuity or a modern prepper planning for uncertain times, the principles of WWII field engineering are as relevant now as they were under fire. If you enjoyed this deep dive into forgotten fieldcraft and survival ingenuity, subscribe to Echoes of Valor for more wartime insights that still shape how we build, protect, and endure. Share this episode with a fellow history enthusiast, and keep the lessons of the past alive, because honestly, knowledge like this never goes out of style.